Fedor Emelianenko is undoubtedly MMA's greatest fighter to never join the UFC. And there's one reason: his shady management team.
Fedor was controlled by some Russian people that were very rough men.
They wanted to co-own the UFC, promote the events themselves, have the UFC build arenas in Russia for their own benefit, and so much more. And their talks with the UFC were described as mafia-like, using intimidation tactics and making people feel uncomfortable.
Dana had to up his security. It got pretty, it got heavy. Yeah. This is dangerous people.
It wasn't Fedor causing the roadblock, but his management that controlled him.
You know, his management, these guys are made the biggest fuck up in the history of all sports.
Had he not though, he may have ended up like his brother Alexander, in prison for sexual assault, accused of being a nationalist, and the sole reason the two brothers don't speak anymore. So this is the story of how shady businessmen stopped Fedor from ever joining the UFC. In the 2000s, Fedor Emelianenko was probably the biggest star in the entirety of MMA, despite having never stepped foot in the octagon.
For a period of time, he was the greatest ever. I don't know.
Yes.
It's you got to look at guys when they're at their best. And Fedor, in pride, was one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest heavyweight ever.
But before we tell this story, you can get involved with the action inside the octagon at UFC 316 thanks to our partners DraftKings Sportsbook. Whether you think Sean O'Malley can handle Merab's takedowns, if Juliana Pena can pull off a huge upset against Kayla Harrison, or if the favorites will rule supreme, DraftKings Sportsbook has an incredible bonus we'd like to share. They're currently offering new customers a $300 bonus after they deposit and bet their first $5. Yes, that's a $300 bonus for just $5. Don't miss out on all the action at UFC 316 at DraftKings. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use my promo code MARKFIGHTING and bet just $5 on any wager and get $300 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code MARKFIGHTING only at DraftKings Sportsbook. But back to Fedor, you have to remember, the UFC wasn't the powerhouse it is today during the mid-2000s. Many MMA fans around the time will confidently say that Pride FC in Japan was the pinnacle of the sport.
When Fedor was fighting in Pride, you know, and this is before the UFC was really huge, right? Because they were huge in Japan in like 2001, 2002. They were filling stadiums in Japan when the UFC was just sort of emerging.
And while Pride had a ton of superstars, whether it was Krokop, Wanderlei Silva, or Shogun Rua, there was one that had an aura like no other, and his name was Fedor. He was headlining sold-out arenas with crowds of nearly 50,000 MMA fans on a routine basis. And inside the ring, Fedor went undefeated from 2001 all the way to 2010. During that time, he fought 28 times and never lost in the Pride FC ring. In a sport of inches, a division where one shot can turn off the lights, and an era of killers, Fedor went 10 years unscathed. It's undoubtedly one of the greatest runs in MMA history, and it's not like he was facing random cans outside of the UFC. No, he was beating former UFC champions, future Hall of Famers, and elite talent at a time when heavyweight was probably at its very strongest.
They would bring somebody in that was a foot taller than Fedor. I can see him in my head. You guys can too. I just can't produce his name for you. And he's got 60 pounds on Fedor. And one point they put him in there with a guy that had 100 pounds on him. But then they also put him in there with Mirko Krokop and Big Nog and Mirko again and Big Nog again. Mark Hunt seems to come to mind. I mean, Fedor was in there with some real rough guys.
Whether it was his boxing, wrestling, or submission game, Fedor had it all. In an era where a lot of fighters were still one-dimensional. And at 6 foot, around 230 pounds, Fedor was a small heavyweight. It was a time when almost all the competitors were taking PEDs, all were super explosive with great cardio. Yet it was the quiet-speaking, stoic, and humble Russian fighter who dominated them all.
These are hard men, and Fedor was the hardest. That motherfucker never changed his expression. He was beating people into a bloody pulp, and he looked like he was sipping tea.
The same, yes.
He was a special guy.
That mentality, man.
Oh my God, he was a special guy. He fought Kevin Randleman, and Kevin Randleman suplexed him on his neck, just threw him through the air and slammed him on his neck, and within moments afterwards, Fedor had him in an armbar. Moments afterwards. You know,
just a machine.
He was a machine.
So with all that star power and all the ability in the world, Fedor was a prime target for the UFC on numerous occasions. And a couple of times he came awfully close to putting pen to paper, if only it wasn't for the outrageous demands of his team. In 2007, the Pride FC empire fell down. Their ties with the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, came to light, and with it, a lot of their lucrative TV deals disappeared.
The first time I noticed that the mob had something to do with Pride, I saw these guys walking down the hallway, like when we was doing like the piss test, and I was coming back from the bathroom with my cup, and I just see these guys walk around in like nice expensive suits, and then everybody just put their head down, put their back against the wall, and just bow.
Whoa.
I was like, what the fuck is going on? You know, culture shock. I had no idea.
Right.
And then after a while, I asked somebody, they're like, oh, those are the bosses, those are the Yakuza.
Did they have missing fingers?
And some of them did.
So with the UFC knowing that Pride were up to their neck in financial problems, they bought the promotion. And as a part of the deal, a lot of fighter contracts were instantly transferred to the UFC, but not all. Some contracts were much more complex and needed a lot of individual attention. That's all but likely where Fedor Emelianenko fell. Either that, or he was a free agent. Dana was confident he'd get Fedor to become a UFC fighter and already had plans of his first appearance being a heavyweight title shot against Randy Couture. But it's here where things begin to get extremely weird. It was no secret the UFC desperately wanted Fedor on their roster, and according to Dana White, they offered a huge sum of money for his signature.
He has become my obsession, man. You know? He has become my obsession. I want it worse than the fans want it now, believe me.
But the message from Team Fedor was the opposite. They were insulted by what the UFC valued Fedor at. And at least from Fedor himself, it wasn't about money, but respect.
Dana White'у надо сначала научиться уважать людей, с которыми он собирается работать. Уважать бойцов.
And it's here where we introduce Fedor's manager, Vadim Finkelstein. Vadim is the founder of the inactive MMA organization M1 Global, where the majority of Russian fighters have come through. The company was financially backed by Russian oligarch Ziauddin Magomedov, who later ended up in prison. If you recall, he's the one Conor McGregor accused Khabib of accepting money from.
You come for money, I come for legacy.
I have money.
This is different. This is different. Why
you took money from Magomedov? Hold on, you took money. You took money from Magomedov, and you were a little lick ass rat. Now what? Putin locked him up. Say something to Putin about locking Magomedov up. Say something. Ask him to release him again. Ask him to release him. Now you don't understand.
Surprise, surprise, it turns out Fedor's manager Vadim was extremely difficult to negotiate with. It's even claimed that their talks with the UFC about signing Fedor became hostile.
A lot of characters in Russia that were connected to Fedor that wanted, they had some heavy requirements of what, you know, they wanted from the UFC, and the UFC wasn't willing to give it to them, and it got pretty testy. It got dangerous. It got, you know, there's some real people over there.
Yes.
Some real dudes.
They viewed Fedor as their biggest cash cow and a national icon, and they wanted to use Fedor as a serious bargaining chip.
A bunch of negotiations with the UFC, but there were very unreasonable demands. Like, they wanted part of the promotion. They wanted to own a piece of everything. They wanted a lot because they knew that with Fedor they had their golden ticket and they wanted to play it out as much as possible.
The demands were wild. Things like the UFC needing to hire their friends as staff, let Fedor compete in Sambo, or for the UFC to build an arena in Russia so Vadim's brother could host music shows. And Dana actually agreed.
And he got offered a ass load of money. A ton of money. Everything that he wanted. He could go fight in Sambo every Thursday night if he wants to. He could do everything he wanted to do. You know, and we showed them nothing but respect and tried to bring them in because the fans want to see this fight and the media keeps talking like this guy's the best. You know what I mean? I put my money where my mouth was, laid everything out and tried to make this thing happen, and they're coming up with unrealistic. This guy doesn't want to fight the best in the world. I don't even want to talk about him.
But then, Vadim and Fedor's team overstepped the line. They wanted the UFC to co-promote with M1 Global and to give up a portion of profits and ownership to the Russians. It left Dana with a new nickname for Vadim, Vadummy.
I don't know how that whole deal works. They say that Fedor is a partner in that whole thing. A partner in what? Fucking M1? What the hell's that doing? Burning money. He's a partner in your burning money business? That's awesome. You're a great manager, Vadummy.
Of course, the UFC rejected their demands. They desperately wanted Fedor, but they didn't necessarily need him. Their roster was stronger than ever after Pride. Stars like Brock Lesnar were emerging, and the UFC's biggest competitor now didn't exist. It was a pivotal moment in the sport. Essentially, Fedor's requests were not too similar to how boxing is run. They wanted freedom to compete outside of the UFC, wanted a big portion of the revenue, and to be partners with the UFC, not independent contractors at the company's mercy. Had the UFC accepted, they would have set the premise and MMA could look vastly different than it does today. Instead, they declined, putting the brand above an individual fighter's demands, which set the path for them to build a monopoly on the sport.
It's set up like they pay you whatever they want to pay you. They let you pretend that you're negotiating while you're not negotiating, because either way, you're still in the contract.
So Fedor and his team put the UFC in the rearview mirror and eventually signed for a new promotion called Affliction. They were happy to accept Fedor's and M1 Global's co-promotion terms, pay over $1 million per fight, and much more. But due to a poor financial model, reliance on pay-per-views, and having a headline fighter test positive a week before their event, Affliction only ever put on 2 shows. Fedor was once again a free agent, and for the second time in as many years, the UFC came knocking. This time, the demands weren't as crazy. No Rock Stadium Moscow, no need to hire their employees, but Vadim and Team Fedor still insisted on co-promoting their fights with M1 Global. While on the UFC side, they were allegedly offering more money than Fedor had ever made, promised a 3-fights deal, and had a huge fight lined up for him, Fedor versus Brock Lesnar for the UFC title.
Flew down there and tried to make Brock Lesnar versus Fedor. And it was for big money.
The pay-per-view alone would have netted Fedor millions of dollars, but with them refusing to budge on the idea of co-promoting the events, the deal fell through yet again, and that was seemingly that for Fedor and the UFC. There were rumors of discussions in 2012 after Strikeforce came to an end, and in 2015 after Fedor returned from his mini-retirement. But considering his win streak had ended, some of that aura was lost. So instead, Fedor ended up fighting pretty much everywhere except the UFC. Rings, Pride, Bodog, Affliction, Strikeforce, M1 Global, Ryzen, Fight Nights Global, and even Bellator. Almost a dozen promotions could boast having Fedor on their roster at one point, but due to these gangster-like business around him, he never made it to the premium organization in the sport. Still to this day, Dana is adamant that Fedor should have been more focused on the money they offered.
I don't even know Fedor. Fedor doesn't know me. We met one time. His statement was, I was all about money. He should have been more about money when we made you that offer in wherever the fuck we were, whatever island that was we were on, and you wouldn't still be fighting at 45 years old.
But that's not where Fedor's connection to questionable people in Russia ends. In fact, there's serious links that heavily suggest his daughter was attacked on the streets of Moscow, and that his brother even supported the people behind the attack. It all started in 2016 when Chechen director Ramzan Kadyrov hosted his own MMA event the day before his 40th birthday. Kadyrov is friendly with numerous Russian MMA fighters, but behind the smiles, he's a frightening man.
Do you regard the United States as an enemy of your country?
Америка не такая сильное государство, чтобы мы рассматривали его как врага России. У нас сильное государство и ядерная держава. Если даже наше государство полностью разрушит, автоматически наши ядерные ракеты полетят там. И весь мир мы перевернем, знаешь, рака поставим.
He's been behind the torture and disappearing of numerous journalists, supported the honor killings of Chechen women for supposed adultery, led the purge or homosexual men in Chechnya, and so much more. But his MMA event that featured Magomed Ankalaev, Said Nurmagomedov, and more recognizable names also featured children. Not just any children, his own. And despite being just 8 to 12 years old, they knew how to fight.
И в такой жуткий размен пускаются мальчики. Да, беспорядочные. Наносят удары.
His eldest son Ahmad even won by TKO, and this unprecedented spectacle was all broadcasted on live free-to-watch TV in Russia, and the kids who had to fight against Kadyrov's children looked utterly petrified to be there. This of course caused a lot of controversy, but in Russia, you learn to keep quiet when it comes to matters about Ramzan Kadyrov.
Я найду тебя, и мы посмотрим, кто из нас шайтан. Самому тебе как-то не стыдно, как ты будешь смотреть в зеркало. Ты ночами не будешь спать, сейчас завещание делать, если я умру, помогите моей семье.
Я очень много шайтанов.
Except for Fedor Emelianenko, the Russian icon publicly spoke out against it, pointing out it's illegal for kids that age to even attend MMA events, let alone fight, and that it's wrong the head of Chechnya was the one organizing it. It caused this huge divide where, simply put, the people in and around Chechnya sided with Kadyrov, while some braver people with ties to Moscow sided with Fedor. But just days after the controversial event, Fedor felt the repercussions of speaking out against Kadyrov firsthand. On her way home from school, Fedor's then 16-year-old daughter was attacked and hospitalized. We don't know if it was an order from Kadyrov himself or just one of his crazed followers, but either way, the result was the same.
One of Kadyrov's crazed supporters wanted to do good for his leader and went on his own sort of mission to find Fedor's daughter and assault her.
Kadyrov went on to say that Fedor had learned from his mistake, and the legendary fighter never said another word on the matter. But months later, this situation caused Fedor's brother, seemingly, to turn his back on the family and cause a huge rift between the two Emelianenkos. If you don't know Fedor's brother Alexander, he's a fellow MMA fighter like Fedor, but that's where their similarities end. He was a decent fighter with some good names on his record, but it's his personal controversies that make him stand out.
The rumor also has it that you once went to hunt a bear with a knife.
Yes.
Did you kill it?
Yes.
What, like you were in need of more adrenaline?
I have enough of everything. I did that for fun.
He's rumored of having Russian nationalist tattoos, fell out with Fedor's manager, and most notably, was sent to prison in 2015 for assaulting and raping his then housekeeper. In short, Alexander Emelianenko is not a nice man, and after coming out of prison around the same time as Fedor's daughter, his niece was attacked. Alexander didn't side with his brother. Instead, he signed a contract to fight under the Akhmat Fight Club banner, a Chechen organization founded by and run by none other than Ramzan Kadyrov himself. And yes, this was the same company that put on the children's fights that Fedor spoke out against in the first place. It was viewed as an act of betrayal by Alexander. Whether it was Fedor not wanting to be associated with his brother's criminal past, him siding with Kadyrov, or something else, the two brothers are rarely, if ever, seen together anymore. And years later, Alexander's friendship with Kadyrov has stayed strong. 4 years after the attack on Fedor's daughter, videos surfaced of Alexander and Kadyrov's sons training MMA together.
Не убегай, не застаивайся, работай, вперед иди. Сюда, молодец.
It just shows how two brothers in almost the exact same position can end up in near opposite scenarios. Fedor holds his Christian values close to heart, while Alexander sides with a dictator known for all kinds of atrocities. But that said, Fedor had people around him who put unrealistic barriers in the way of him ever joining the UFC. He was their big cash cow, their bargaining chip, and sadly, they overplayed their hand time and time again in getting him into the octagon. It's one of those big MMA questions that will always remain a what if. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video. The research took a lot of time, so if you're still here, please subscribe to let us know our time was well spent. Thank you, and we'll catch you in the next video.